So this is the talk titled MCP and AI. It's really more about how MCP can serve AI applications, and particularly how Jack Henry can help with that. All right, so this is me. I'm a principal engineer. When people ask me what I do, to make it short, I say I crowdsource solutions across, our customers, the developers against our platform, our deeply technical areas, and kind of help across the Office of the CTO, product engineering in particular. Okay, so first of all, what is MCP? This talk is going to be primarily focused on what can Jack Henry offer in this space, but I wanted to get us on the same page talking about these things. So MCP, Model Context Protocol, is an open standard. Essentially defines how an AI application and a large language model can interact with information that is not available to it and to perform actions on your behalf in a standardized way. So in an AI application, when you're trying to solve problems in that space, you're essentially building up more and more context around kind of the question you want to answer or the problem you want to solve. So what MCP allows for is the building of that context and then solution space in the form of tools for you to do that. So the protocol itself works in defining a specific architecture in how you will interact with these things. So the architecture looks roughly like this. A host is just an application. It could be an app you built. It could be a pre-existing tool like Claude or Copilot or Gemini or things like that. The client itself is, you can think of it very roughly like say an HTTP client, right? It's a way for you to communicate with a server. It's for the host or the application to be able to communicate with a server. And then the server is the cool thing, right? It's the thing that essentially serves you back the tools or resources that you can utilize or make available to your application. Okay, so what we're mainly going to talk about today are servers. The host and client are only moderately interesting in this space. The server has essentially kind of three things that it can do that allow for you to develop in your application. I'm going to talk about the middle one first, resources. So this is essentially a way you can provide information to your application, your AI application that doesn't, it couldn't get, right, say from its vast amount of data or from, say, another tool like the access to the public internet, and allows, again, for you to build up that context, right? I'll go a little bit more into how that works here in a little bit. Tools are functions that can be called, right? So you could think of it as, I don't know, a trite example might be creating a calendar event, right? These are things that are generally meant to be an action of some kind, right? You could think of it from an API perspective. You could think of it as, perhaps, not always, but perhaps. These things are all defined in JSON schema. This is how the protocol defines how the AI can understand what it got back, right? So the schema is not defined here. At the very beginning of this talk, I kind of skipped past it. There's a learn more link at the bottom. This is all fully defined in a really great way that you can go look up from that link. So when you provide the list of, say, resources or tools to an AI application, what's happening is it's being delivered essentially a list of tools with a description of what the tool does or what the resource does, such that when you, say, send a prompt into a large language model, it can say, oh, well, what I need is more information from this tool or this resource. I need to take this action, or I need to get this data to build up my context to do the thing that I want to do. As I mentioned, tools might be like a thing like taking an action. They're kind of by definition in the protocol meant to be human in the loop, right? They're not, the protocol specifies that that's how they're intended to be used, meaning if you were to, say, create a calendar event, you might want to prompt somebody to ask, do you actually want to do this, right? It's not how you implement and use these things, of course, is up to you or the application that you're using. Something like Claude or Copilot will do that by default. It'll say, okay, this is a tool. Do you want me to allow you to do this? Prompts, I'm not going to get in too much. They're kind of a way to think about that as a way to compose resources and tools into a way to make it easier to shortcut what should I do next, or kind of what script might I want to run if, say, I wanted to summarize a document. Okay. In the server, the reason I said kind of like HTTP earlier is that the client doesn't care where the server is. It's just a protocol that defines, hey, go get me this stuff, give me these tools, these resources, and then execute them. They're likely going to be, in our case, the case that we're kind of talking about, served over HTTP. But you can also have servers that are local, things that can read from your file system, things that could, execute, a bash command, things like that. When you connect to one, there's, again, a specified protocol on how that works. I'm not going to read through all of these things. They're pretty straightforward, but you'll essentially initiate the connection, get back that you're good, what's the version, and then you'll ask for, okay, what can you do for me? And then you'll use it and shut it down. Oops. There we go. Okay, how do I use them? Well, first you're going to have an application of some sort. Maybe you developed it yourself to fit a specific need of your own. Maybe you're using something like Claude or Copilot. And those that if you're developing your own, you'll build your own MCP client. There's lots of libraries and SDKs out there in all the languages that you might choose to be able to do that. Once you've done that, you just connect to the server. So doing that, again, if you're in an existing application, is great. You're writing the code yourself. You can kind of imagine how that might work. I have a little kind of screenshot here. This is Claude. When you go to add an MCP server, you can do so through their UI. You can add custom ones. One of the great things about MCP servers are that a lot of companies are releasing them to serve functionality that they might have. You'll see Google and GitHub up here as options. There's a directory you could add in most of these tools, and then you can add custom ones. So this is where if you were to write your own, or there was one that wasn't published, say to Claude as of yet, but was available, you can configure your own. That'll be important here in a minute. Then there's authentication, right? So this was me. I think I was GitHub. I set up the GitHub MCP server, and I was asked to authorize. This is kind of a standard OAuth consent flow that it will have, but you'll go through that authentication mechanism. Most of these things will have them. There are some that are public and don't. And the ways that they authenticate are primarily going to be OAuth based, but there can be some differences between each one as you utilize them. You may have to configure the product that you're interacting with, the MCP that owns the MCP server. You may have to configure auth in their layer first. So with GitHub, for example, you don't have to do this, but in other products, you might have to say create an OAuth client with that to designate it as a thing that you can interact with. Okay, once that's done, you just use the thing, right? So again, if this is your own application, you're kind of building up your own prompts and you know, kind of your own agent to kind of build the conversation and the context together. This is again Claude, and I happen to interact or configure Slack, which is what we use internally. I blocked out a couple of things because there was some information that wasn't pertinent for this talk, but JQ is another principal engineer that we work with, and I just asked it, hey, what's the most recent Slack conversation? Summarize it for me. And it happened to be about a conversation we had about projecting the costs of using Cloud Spanner. And it, you know, of course, had to execute and request multiple resources to do that. It had to search for JQ. It had to search to find the specific kind of thread that we were working on, and then it had to gather the last set of transactions, figure out then thereafter, okay, well, what designates the last conversation? So there are multiple steps here that resulted in this that use that MCP tool for the context to give to the LLM to then produce this result. Okay, Jack Henry. So this is Jack Henry DevCon. What do we have? We have on the Banno platform an MCP server that covers some of the API surface that we have in our admin API. There was a talk yesterday that Matt Kerner did about that admin API. It you know, defines a set of functions that you, or I should say, employees of banks and credit unions that have Banno could use, or that you could create a service account for to access said admin API. What you're seeing here is a list of the tools and resources we have available in that MCP server. You'll notice that some of them aren't just perform an action or, gather data that's just focused on what the admin API surface is. It also allowed you to gather information about a user that's in here, including, you know, getting their transactions and getting their list of accounts and things like that. Oops, sorry. Okay. For us, in order to be able to utilize our MCP server, we're using auth. It's the same exact mechanism that we have on our admin API today. So if you are a bank or a credit union, or you are working with one, they can set you up access to do so by creating an auth client. This happens to be a screenshot of what that looks like in our back office. You'll see, you know, you've got, this is a client credential flow. This is important here, suppose I have that. Redirect URIs. Your application is essentially where you're calling back to in the OAuth flow. So depending on what you're using, I was using for this Gemini CLI, which is running locally on my machine, so the callback for OAuth was local. But that's important because that's going to be different based on whatever tool you set up. So if it's your own, you set up your own client, you're going to need to understand where you're calling back to so that you can finish the auth flow. Excuse me. So, like I mentioned earlier, this is a required step that you might have. All right, next here. Oh, I actually don't want to go here yet. Okay, so the MCP server that we have, I showed you the list of functions. Again, that's being delivered to an application. This is Gemini CLI, running on my machine, running locally, but I've configured it to have the Banno MCP server available to it. You can essentially ask Gemini a question, and since I've configured that tool, it will automatically go, oh, okay, this is the list of tools available to me. Now I can say, let me answer your question by building up the context I need to do so. So what you're going to see here is me doing that. This is a short video. I'll talk over it while we're going. So first, I asked it, okay, what can I do? Right? So you saw the screenshot earlier. And now I'm going to ask it a question. I wasn't typing particularly fast. And it says, if you can't read it, what is the largest transaction Thomas Tester has had in the last 5 days? I asked this question because that's not a question that can be answered by using one resource that's available through our server. You're seeing it's called user search. Okay, well there's Thomas Tester. It's now asked for, okay, what accounts do they have? And then, okay, now what transactions do they have? And now it's taking that context, parsing through it to deliver a result, which is, it's again kind of hard to see. The largest transaction for Thomas Tester in the last 5 days was an interest deposit of a $116.75 on this date. I'm actually going to go back one step, if it will. There we go. I'm just going to let that play again. What I'm trying to point out here, and I'm kind of repeating myself, I understand, but the power here isn't in the individual tools that we've made available to you, but the fact that those things can be orchestrated on your behalf to answer questions by the LLM. So while that plays, the other thing that's really interesting here is that, that's a fun thing. In Matt Kerner's talk, he kind of showed you how you could do this just by kind of calling our APIs to get a specific set of responses back. Where this becomes really interesting is any application can have any number of servers available to it. Meaning, you can provide context beyond what Banno offers into your own. So if you are, let's take, Matt had a great example around remote deposit capture. Somebody called in and they said, hey, I can't make any more deposits. And so he had a great widget that he showed they could have built, which said, okay, let me look up this user, let me see their accounts, let me look at their RDC settings, and oh, lo and behold, they're at their max. Was doing that from within the context of their own CRM. Well, if that CRM, say, had its own MCP server that you combined with Banno's, instead of going through that step, you could have simply said, why is it that Thomas Tester cannot make any more deposits? And it would have orchestrated the same or similar set of API calls and just given you a result that said, oh, yeah, they're over their limit. Another example might be, let's use one outside of Banno. Let's say this is a fun one that lots of the documentation likes to use. You wanted to have a thing that allowed you to schedule, say, a time to meet with one of your customers because they need help for some reason, you could essentially provide access to your calendaring information. You could provide access to the CRM so that you could set up appropriate communication channels, and you could just say while on the phone, hey, can we get together, seems like these are the right things for you, and then have it schedule those for you in a tool call at the end. Okay. Back to what Jack Henry has. I actually skipped past this, I realized earlier. This is available on our test institutions only at this point. There's a lot of security considerations that go into utilizing data like this via an MCP server to pass into an LLM. If you're not careful or you're not considerate of what you're doing with that data, you might be passing your customer data into a non-indemnified large language model, meaning that data then is available for it to reuse. So we use in our applications indemnified models, meaning that's not going to happen, but we think it's incumbent upon us to make sure you developers understand that if you use a tool like this with an existing institution, with real customers, that the result could be that you're sharing that information in a way that you may not want. So for now, this isn't on jackhenry.dev yet, because we're in kind of a test mode. So if you all want to use it, you can talk to me, you can talk to one of our DevRel folks, and we can get you set up in our test institutions so that you can start to play in this environment. It's available for you to use. And you can start to see the power of it yourself just by using existing tools. And this data is all fake. So getting it into a non-indemnified model shouldn't be a big deal. This is just the first one that we've released. We are in development on others. So things like, an example might be, core data, Silver Lake data, Scimitar data. Things like that we could start to expose. Again, it has the same security considerations. Perhaps even more so than what Banno has. You'll want to be careful about the data that's in your core getting out to the wrong places, and which is why you'll just kind of continue to hear from us what we think is kind of the right pattern on how you might use these in your own applications. And that is it. Okay,